My name's Kevin. I am so thrilled to be here with Julie Otsuka and Jennifer Egan. We're going to have a nice conversation about memory today. But just to start, a little intro. Jennifer Egan is the author of The Candy House, as well as 6 previous books of fiction, including Manhattan Beach, winner of the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, A Visit from the Goon Squad, which won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award, The Keep, the short story collection Emerald City, Look at Me, a National Book Award finalist, and The Invisible Circus. Julie Otsuka was born and raised in California. She is the recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship, and her first novel, When the Emperor Was Divine, won the 2003 Asian American Literary Award and the 2003 American Library Association's Alex Award. Her second novel, The Buddha in the Attic, was a finalist for the National Book Award in 2011 and won the 2012 Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction and the 2011 Langham Prize in American Historical Fiction. The Buddha in the Attic was an international bestseller and the winner of the prestigious Prix Femina Étrangère in 2012, and the Albatross, I can't read that, in 2013. The Swimmers is her most recent novel. She lives in New York City. So let's give them a round of applause. So before we start, we're going to hear a little reading from each book, and then in the last 10 minutes, we'll take some audience questions, so just start mulling those over now. We didn't decide who goes first.
All right, I will. Thank you so much. We are thrilled to see so many people here. Really did not count on that, given the conditions. All right, I'm just going to read a teeny little bit of a chapter called The Mystery of Our Mother. Long ago, she told us, when we were just a hope in her heart, or not even that, because she never wanted children, or thought she didn't, a higher power touched our mother's head and said, "Stop what you're doing. 2 little girls are waiting to be born, and you need to have them right away, because the world is desperate for their brightness." So she stopped studying anthropology, which she really did love, and maybe would study again someday, when you're all grown up and don't need me anymore. We'll always need you. I'll always need you too, that's for sure. I'll try not to drive you crazy with my mommy needs. Till the end. Well, I stopped going to anthropology school and I married your daddy and we brought you into the world, and here you are. It all worked out perfectly. Where is Daddy? You'll see him next week. He's taking you to ballet. Last time he never came. I'll be here, just in case. He can't make a bun. That's not important, honey. Before ballet? Don't whine, sweetie. He threw Tam Tam out the window of the car. He said she was moth-eaten. That was unfortunate. How could you marry him? Love is a mystery. Does Daddy love you? He loves you. That's what matters. He said we were young spendthrifts. Did he now? He said, "Can we not talk about what he said? We're just telling you." I don't need to be told. I know your father very well. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much.
So I'm just going to read the first 2 paragraphs from the very beginning of the book. And the first chapter is called The Underground Pool. The pool is located deep underground in a large cavernous chamber many feet beneath the streets of our town. Some of us come here because we are injured and need to heal. We suffer from bad backs, fallen arches, shattered dreams, broken hearts, anxiety, melancholia, anhedonia, the usual above-ground afflictions. Others of us are employed at the college nearby and prefer to take our lunch breaks down below in the waters far away from the harsh glares of our colleagues and screens. Some of us come here to escape, if only for an hour, our disappointing marriages on land. Many of us live in the neighborhood and simply love to swim. One of us, Alice, a retired lab technician now in the early stages of dementia, comes here because she always has. And even though she may not remember the combination to her locker or where she put her towel, the moment she slips into the water, she knows what to do. Her stroke is long and fluid, her kick is strong, her mind clear. Up there, she says, I'm just another little old lady, but down here at the pool, I'm myself. Most days at the pool, we are able to leave our troubles on land behind. Failed painters become elegant breaststrokers. Untenured professors slice shark-like through the water with breathtaking speed. The newly divorced HR manager grabs a faded red styrofoam board and kicks with impunity. The downsized ab man floats otter-like on his back as he stares up at the clouds on the painted pale blue ceiling, thinking, for the first time all day long, of nothing. Let it go. Warriors stop worrying. Bereaved widows cease to grieve. Out-of-work actors unable to get traction above ground glide effortlessly down the fast lane in their element. At last, I've arrived. And for a brief interlude, we are at home in the world. Bad moods lift, tics disappear, memories reawaken, migraines dissolve, and slowly, the chatter in our minds begins to subside as stroke after stroke, length after length, we swim. And when we are finished with our laps, we hoist ourselves up out of the pool, dripping and refreshed, our equilibrium restored, ready to face another day on land.
So one thing that really, so both of your novels, I kind of want to start with what's similar about them. They're both concerned with or maybe possessed by the idea of memory, what it means to us, what it does to us. And I think also similarly, both of your books are, I would say, like, not unusually structured, but not traditionally structured. I kind of want to start with you, Julie. Like, what is the relationship between the structure of The Swimmers and what it has to say about memory?
Oh, gee. I just wrote it, you know? I don't really think about structure, but I think that in the first, the novel takes a strange twist halfway through, and I'm always interested in just different points of view, but the main character is Alice, and she's quietly there from the very beginning as one of the regulars at this pool, but I wanted to show in the second half, as she is losing her memory and her mind, I guess as the author, I'm allowed to implant whatever memories that I want that might be important to the reader into her mind, but I did want to make reference to her childhood in the concentration camps during World War II. That was really important for me, just as a writer, to keep there very quietly, because I think that's a memory that's often, it's been historically repressed, even now. So that was an important part of her own, childhood that I wanted to keep alive on the page.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before the event. I guess, like, show of hands, how many people learned about Japanese internment in their education? Oh, that's not bad.
That's a lot, actually.
It's like, what, a third?
Yeah, at least, yeah.
And I guess, it's interesting because, like, as Alice is, like, losing her memories, like, in a lot of ways, like, the book becomes more specific and more narrow. And I guess, is that like a reflection of how you feel dementia works? Or?
Well, I feel like often in patients with dementia, their childhood memories are the last to go. So that was very convenient for me as a writer, since I really did want to focus on her childhood years, and particularly on her memories of what we Japanese Americans call camp.
So in The Candy House, I feel like it's a novel, but there are like 20 different novels like brimming from it. I guess, like, how did you think of structure?
Well, I want to just first say that I just finished Julie's book this morning, and it's just amazing and so moving, and it's sort of incredible how, to what degree, in completely different ways, we are grappling with some of the same issues, as you just said, Kevin. And I think one of those issues is the question of, who are we without our memories, and where are all the ones that we don't remember? Which, and of course, in the case of someone with dementia, that extremely obvious, but it's actually true of all of us. So to your question about structure, in some sense, The Candy House, I hoped I could structure it like A Visit from the Goon Squad, meaning in individual parts that each stand on their own, that are each about a different person and each have a different kind of technical approach. And obviously I and the reader lose some stuff with that structure. We probably above all, we don't have continuity to rely on. But with any technical choice, there are gains and losses. And I feel like when using this ensemble structure that hopefully works in a more kaleidoscopic way, what I can do is get a much more breadth. And suggest this kind of churn of human life that's all around us that becomes harder to access when we're just looking at one specific story moving forward. So I knew that I would write it in this piecemeal way, but then the question is always sort of, okay, but how do those pieces actually fit together? And sometimes I find that I'm kind of surprised to hear, Julie, that you say you kind of just wrote it that way, because the structure seems very designed to me. I also write really instinctively at the beginning, but ultimately I find that I do actually have to have a clear sense of why I'm doing what I'm doing structurally. And with a book like this, the order is often one of the last things to fall into place, because the question is, what is the bigger story that I'm telling, and how can I best serve that story? And then on the more immediate level, the question is actually a little bit different, which is, what is the most fun thing I can give the reader, having just given them whatever it is that has come before? So it's the combination of those two things that lead me to those final decisions.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. I feel like the structure of Candy House is like, it's like a spiral, like it's sort of rounding around an idea until it gets there. And then I feel like with Julie's, it's like a triangle, like you kind of narrow it down slowly.
I do find sometimes that actually having an image in mind is really helpful. I think with this one, it's something a little like a helix, that also maybe is a little like a galaxy, sort of something turning in space.
You're just adding dimensions.
What I imagined, yeah.
And actually, I had an image of two boxes, one under the ground, which is like the enclosed pool, and then one above ground, which is Bella Vista, which is the care home she ends up in. So they were kind of these reflecting spaces.
Oh, I love that. I guess when you guys approach these, their stylistic choices, their narrative choices, do you worry about losing the reader when you don't have like a traditional plot? I guess I'll start with you.
I'm always thinking about the reader's experience, for sure. And there's no question that some people do not like a book structured this way as much as they like a more straightforward narrative. But I don't worry beyond a certain point, because I feel like my job is to tell a story. This is true with any individual structure that I use, because there are a lot of kind of kooky ones within this book as well. My job is to find the story that can only be told that way. And if I manage it, I've accomplished a couple of things. One is hopefully told a good story. Two is used a form that we don't see as much in fiction, which I think is cool, and also a reminder that fiction was invented to be a very encompassing, flexible form that could actually absorb all kinds of discourse. And three, it means I'm actually telling a story I couldn't have told otherwise, so I'm pushing myself. And if I do it well, my hope is that, a reader who's game to, try slightly different things will enjoy it. But I think a lot about, and I actually have many readers. I have a writing group that I rely on, and my question is always does it hold your interest? Where is it flat? I mean, those really basic questions are so important to me.
Yeah, I think the effect in the Candy House is kind of dazzling. You just never know what each chapter is going to be, what voice it's going to have. I kind of felt a similar effect in your book as well, because it's in, I think, 5 different discrete parts, and you may not even know who the voice of the next one is. I guess, how much are you thinking about the reader?
Not a whole lot. Sorry.
Different approaches.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just started reading Jenny's book, and what you said about it, you wanting it to be a fun experience for the reader. I mean, I love, as a reader, just sudden shifts and just being someplace completely new and having to, I like not knowing where I'm going. That's fun for me as a reader. And so I think when I did kind of conceptualize the book, but I began with these just two really disparate ideas, which were swimming and dementia. I didn't know, there were just two subjects I was really interested in, and I didn't know how I was going to end up connecting them until I just realized that the character Alice could be this tiny thread.
So you just have to like write through it to find that?
Yeah, actually the first version of the novel that was set in the pool, the pool chapters, there was no Alice character. And then I later, there was a character with dementia, and then I thought, oh, I can make her into Alice. So I went back and I quietly put Alice, I just threaded her through those first two chapters.
I'm curious if you had a similar experience, because a lot of your characters are like popping in and out of this like little universe. A lot of Goon Squad characters obviously show up again in fun ways. I guess, like, how did you plot that out?
I didn't really. I mean, I had, there were people I was curious about and wanted to see again from Goon Squad, often because they were very opaque in their first appearance there, or they had a very small appearance that was very suggestive, at least to me. And one of those is a guy named Bix Bowden, who ends up being a major character in this book. Not that he's present more often than any of the others, which is just one chapter, really, but the invention that he makes is what kind of powers the story in certain ways. And what intrigued me about him when we met him the first time in Goon Squad is that it's 1993, and he basically predicts the impact of social media. And I thought, oh, what if he is actually the one who invents it in my world? And so my sense that he would do that made me feel like I wanted to share that with the reader in some way. I don't really like knowing more than the reader. And so that it was more my own curiosity and instincts that led me to follow up on certain people, not so much a plan. And I never actually had to, I did a little threading of the kind you're talking about, but not much, because generally it was my own curiosity that led me to write about certain people, so there they were. The bigger problem is just there's a very high failure ratio with projects like this. I mean, just a lot of stuff doesn't work, because, there is that happy time when I find a story that can only be told in whatever way, but unfortunately more often I'm trying to tell a story that can't be told that way. So I end up with a lot of material that I can't use. So it often feels like there's a lot of trial and error in this process. Again, sort of the opposite of planning, but ultimately I am very clear on what I have and why I'm structuring it the way I am to provide the best experience for the reader.
Yeah, I'm so curious, how much cutting room floor material is there from the Candy House?
I would say of the first draft material I wrote, at least 50% was unusable. So, but I'm kind of failure obsessed, so I often think, well, that failed. But I actually am really trying to move away from that language, because the truth is that very often it's just that the approach wasn't right, or these so-called failures are often just impulses that need to combine in a different way at a later point. So there's sort of I've come to feel a little bit of a conservation of material law in fiction writing, at least for me, where things do come back. I return to things, and sometimes it's just the timing wasn't right, or the mix of ideas wasn't right.
Yeah, I think it's just in my imagination, but I just imagine there are so many really perfect little chapters that don't fit necessarily in the Candy House, but maybe stand really well on their own. Do you feel that way?
Nope. I wish there were. I mean, if that had been the case, they would be in the Candy House, because a perfect little chapter is I'm not letting that sit around. Are you kidding? That's going in. And then I have to contend with that. Sort of, how does it fit? How do I house it? That might require more writing, but I certainly wouldn't let a perfectly lovely, workable chapter sit around. No way.
And for you, Julie, I know you work on, your novels are very slim and they're really tight, and you work on them for a very long time, it seems. Revision for you, is it a lot of cutting, is it a lot of pairing, or is it a lot of writing through things?
I feel like I'm constantly revising as I'm writing, and usually when I write a scene, I mean, it's kind of a mess. And so there is a lot of paring down. And I also do a lot of research, for not so much for this, but well, I did some for this, but I did much more for my last novel. But I probably use, like 1.7% of my research in the book, but I have to know as the writer that I am very, very familiar with the landscape before I can begin to write about a particular world. But I'll often write like beautiful little scenes, but if they don't serve the overall arc of the story, I'm just ruthless. It's out. But doesn't mean that it won't be used at some future point. Yeah. I feel like anything that allows the writer to generate material is great, So I feel like in the moment it might feel like it was for naught, but it might not be.
I kind of want to return to the theme of memory a little bit. I feel like The Swimmers, it thinks about memory as a way to kind of like reflect on the past and be self-reflective. Does that seem right?
Yeah.
Nailed it. We talked a little bit about, Japanese internment and like how that's kind of history that we worry will be forgotten. Are there just other things you're worried about people losing with memory?
You mean parts of history?
Yeah, parts of history or just like maybe emotionally.
Oh, well, I mean, the most difficult thing is to watch somebody, forget basically that they're your mother. I mean, it's actually more painful for the other person than for the person, herself, who is losing her memories.
Yeah, I guess that's what we're getting at, the character of Alice's daughter.
Yeah.
I guess, like, how did you arrive there as, like, sort of the ending?
Oh, I often write past my endings, and then I'll go, actually that scene was somewhere in the middle initially, and I had a few ideas for endings that just didn't quite work, and then I thought, oh, I'll just, that would work. I feel like that's a very punchy, powerful scene, and I'll just move it to the very end as something to leave the reader with. And it also kind of ends on a hopeful note, after a lot of despair. But it sometimes takes me a while to find the ending. Mm-hmm. It could be in the middle of a mass of material.
Yeah. And I guess with the Candy House, I felt like it was actually kind of like forward thinking about memory. Actually, I feel like we haven't explained the concept of the Candy House fully. Do you want to talk about Own Your Unconscious?
So Bix, the man I mentioned earlier, who has already invented social media when we meet him in the book, and therefore is a super famous guy who's actually usually is not even supposed to be out on the street by himself actually without like some sort of protection. But he's having sort of a midlife crisis because he knows that he has basically he doesn't have another idea after that one. And a kind of wacky series of events leads him to the East River at night, where so he's defying his board's rules, and where he finds himself standing in the same place where in 1993, in the one scene that we really meet him in Goon Squad, he stood with two friends from NYU after a night of partying, and they all watched the sunrise, and then these two guys walked down the river and ended up going swimming, and one of them was pulled away by a current and drowned. And Bix finds himself trying to reconstruct the real details of that morning now that he's standing in the same place, and he finds that he really can't. He just doesn't remember. And he is struck by the irony of the fact that he has invented a world where everyone can find everyone. Everything is findable and searchable, and he's helped to create that reality, but his own memory is completely lost to him, a lot of it. And so he invents something called Own Your Unconscious, which is a cube that lets you externalize the whole of your consciousness, all of your memories starting at birth, and that thereby giving you the opportunity to view any of that from a present day perspective. So presumably all of your memories are now yours, hence the name. There's also a sharing option, which Bix thought would be kind of a sideline, which lets people share all or part of their consciousnesses to a collective in exchange for access to that collective themselves. But Bix is very surprised to find that this actually becomes the main thing, and it's sort of a big cultural force in the world of this book. But it really is his frustration at not being able to access all of his memory that leads to the invention. And the way that it's used in the book is mostly to solve mysteries. There's a woman who uses it to view a pivotal day in her father's life from his point of view. There's a guy who uses it to take these very brief memories he has of someone whose name he doesn't know to reconstruct their life using other snippets he can glean from the consciousness, the collective, in exchange for sharing his little snippets. So there are all kinds of things like that. There is one of the guys who drowned with the boy who got pulled away by the current, views Bix's memory of that day. So he sees himself as a 19-year-old through Bix's eyes and revisits the details of that morning. So it's used, and actually there's an idea that in the world of the book, one of the benefits of this is that apparently it cures dementia in most cases, because people re-infuse healthy, complete consciousness, and they override the erosion, and which is, of course, a wonderful idea.
Yeah, I just love that you have a big, pretty heavy sci-fi concept that's at the core of the book, but that's sort of not what the book is. It's just how all these different characters interact with that piece of technology, or how that changes their life. And it's interesting, they're obviously the natural inclination is for them to solve little mysteries, but the outcomes are kind of very, very varied, I would say. I guess how do I phrase this? I feel like if there is a point, a common thing in here, I think the book kind of has an anti-nostalgia stance. Would you say that's true?
I love that you say that, because sometimes people say, oh, it seems like it's a book about nostalgia, and I immediately think, no. So maybe you're right. Nostalgia, I think it is, it's certainly not presented as a solution. I feel like nostalgia is always a little bit of there's a propaganda element to nostalgia, even if it's just personal, not to mention when your phone sends up a montage with music of, your child 10 years ago. And that, of course, is overt manipulation that's designed to get you to use your phone because you haven't been on it for 5 minutes, and that's too long to stay off. No one's making money. So I'm a little wary of nostalgia. And actually, one of the things that happens when people use this device is that it has a tendency to destroy nostalgia, because nostalgia, of course, is a kind of montage that we make to serve our own wishes often. And so being confronted with the cold reality, which is what happens when people use this device to look at their own memories or other people's, has a tendency to dispel those nice, rosy clouds of curation that are basically what nostalgia is.
Yeah, a friend texted me a video a couple weeks ago, and it was one of the ones the iPhone will generate a slideshow with music, and it was set to Landslide by Stevie Nicks, or so it's Fleetwood Mac, and it was all footage from Black Lives Matter protests in Portland when the van abductions were happening, and the police were out attacking protesters, and just set to Landslide. It's maybe the most jarring thing I'd ever seen in my life. But,
wow.
But that's how good technology is at this. It just doesn't understand the context for any of this.
Thank God, because if they get better at it, it's not good for us.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll take some stuff from the audience. I guess kind of a broader question. I kind of want to extend this talk about nostalgia. What's the line between self-reflection and nostalgia?
Boy, again, I just, I don't really know.
Maybe that's too big.
No, that's huge, these concepts. I guess nostalgia is something I try to stay away from in my writing. I don't, I shy away from overly sentimentalizing something. And the memories that I want to foreground are not really nostalgic memories. They're more painful memories. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but self-reflection is something that Alice cannot do. all we see is just kind of the detritus, of her memories, and just kind of whatever floats to the surface in a very sometimes random and very haphazard way.
Yeah, and then I guess I feel like that's like the really tragic thing in your depiction of dementia, and maybe it's just how dementia is. It like that self-reflection is then put upon the people around them that are like hearing these stories anew.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my question was: is there, when a person has lost almost all of their memories and can no longer reflect or access anything about who they are, like, is there some essence of them that is left? And I think that as a daughter or as a spouse of somebody who's suffering from dementia, we tend to, just by literally seeing the physical face, we tend to project more onto that person than actually exists. I mean, that person could be a fairly empty shell, But I think that it's just very human just to want to imbue them with more of who they are than is actually there.
I want to ask a question to Julie also, because there's a beautiful part of the book when the daughter, Alice's daughter and husband are looking at things that were her possessions after she has moved into the assisted living place. And these items that were just very workaday, utilitarian items like makeup, I can't even remember, like just things that have no significance when they're in active use, but become incredibly poignant artifacts in the absence of the person, not just physically, but especially mentally, knowing this is not a woman who's wearing this makeup anymore, this is not a woman who's taking this aspirin anymore, or whatever. I was really struck by that in your book, the way that the unintended poignancy and kind of artifact status of everyday objects when the person in the middle of that life is, in whatever way, absent. And it seemed like nostalgia in a sense.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you look at this person's stuff and it makes you miss them. So, and I guess that could be a nostalgic feeling. I mean, I think also for Japanese Americans, it's like we destroyed so much of our stuff during World War II. Like everything that was, even vaguely Japanese was just destroyed or burned or buried. So there's a whole generation's worth of stuff that like I didn't inherit, So sometimes you just hang on to whatever you have, and it could just be meaningless, like an empty lipstick case, but it means a lot to you, because I also think I'm just obsessed with detail. That's just the way my brain works. I think because of my training, probably in the arts, just visually as a painter and as a sculptor, I tend to fixate on just what I can see literally with my eyes. And objects are very telling, Objects almost have life.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the other things I loved, kind of in a similar vein with the swimmers, is just like how actually maybe someone's like routine and the mundanity of their life is like a portrayal of them, or maybe a reflection of them. And kind of in contrast, I feel like in Candy House, like everyone thinks the thing that defines them, not everyone, but many of the characters think it's like this one moment, they want to go back to that moment. And they usually don't find necessarily what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, or they want to. Yes, they definitely don't find what they're looking for on the whole, or they do, but it doesn't do for them what they hope. So, for example, Drew, the guy who was swimming with the one who drowned, revisits this day through Bix's eyes, but that can't solve the fact that this guy still drowned and he still blames himself for it. In fact, it just brings he finds it agonizing to see himself in the moments before that happens, because he's now witnessing his 19-year-old self before the event that will, really mar the rest of his life, or certainly impact it. So, I guess in a way what that gets at is we have such a craving for knowledge, for information, and a belief, I think kind of a cultural belief, that information can save us if we just know. But we find out again and again in all kinds of ways that that's not true. In fact, not only can it not save us, it often fails to predict what seems very obvious as soon as it happens. So curiosity is just a deep human impulse, and I'm a very curious person. I think you could argue that this is a book structured around curiosity for curiosity, but it's also really about the limits of curiosity, or the limits of satisfying curiosity.
This has been great. Let's take some questions from the audience. I'll repeat them, but just try and be as loud as you can. You jumped up right. You go first.
Okay, I didn't hear that perfectly, but I'm hoping I'm going to summarize it. What is the kind of memory relationship between Goon Squad and the Candy House? It's a great question, because in a way, one thing I find, since I never write about myself at all, my memories of my books sort of don't overlap really with memories of my own life. It feels like I'm remembering other people that I know. It sort of occupies the same part of my brain as like family members and their histories and just people I've met. So it was very much like recalling things that were interesting to me and trying to further them, or people that I used to know and wondering how they're doing now, or what happened to those kids of theirs. Those are always the questions I ask whenever I meet people anyway, so I guess I was asking those questions of my characters. But the one funny thing was I didn't reread Goon Squad until the very end, and I discovered that I'd actually made a lot of factual errors because I just didn't remember everything about these characters' biographies. And some of them were a little bit complicated to untangle. Like, oh no, he had 4 sisters. What am I going to do with all these sisters? So it was a memory, but I guess, in the parlance of the book, what I didn't do was review it ahead of time. I just let it remain a memory, and then I sort of fact-checked it at the end.
You back there, Gray? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have 2 related questions. First is, the first thing to deal with the question of who are we, who use our memories, or will we use our memories, where do they go? I'm wondering if the process of writing elucidated that question. To what extent are humans made up of their memories, and if those memories go, what's left? And the second question is on the process of format. Julie, you mentioned you do a lot of research and I'm just curious about how you guys approach research and writing.
You want to restate the question?
Oh, yeah. So 2 questions. One was about how you guys approach your research, and then the second question, or the first question was, are we made up of our memories? Mm-hmm. Did writing the books help answer that question for you? So,
I feel like we are our memories. That's. I think I would say yes, completely. And without our memories, we're not really ourselves. And my research, I am obsessed with these Clairefontaine notebooks, with graph paper, and I just take notes on every little factoid possible that I could use in the novel, and so it's kind of like my encyclopedia for the book that I'm about to write. So I just kind of haphazardly gather all this data and put it in the hopper, and then when I start writing, I kind of see how it all shakes out, but I tend to forget about what I've written down in my notebooks. But if I need to look up a certain thing, I know where to go.
And I would say I agree that there's a possibility with this technology that you can, of course, since you can externalize consciousness and re-infuse it, that creates the option to erase things. So Drew, the guy who has been, really haunted for his whole adult life by the fact that he could have possibly saved this guy and didn't, considers after this technology of Bix's is released, erasing the memory of that day. But what he realizes is that he can erase his memory of the day, but he can't erase the awareness of it and the pain over it that has permeated the entire rest of his life. And then he would have to erase his whole life to erase that pain. So there's no way to do it. And in a way, I guess that was me following the thought experiment and arriving at exactly the same conclusion you just came to. And as far as research goes, I love research, and I did a ton for Manhattan Beach, as much as anything else because it generated the story. But I did zero for the Candy House, certainly zero in the realm of tech, because I didn't want to know what was going on right now in Silicon Valley. I figured that could only tie me down. And so I didn't, although I did receive a kind of disturbing email recently from a company that said, well, it's just amazing. We're working on a product that's very much like what you're doing. And I was like, although I personally think it's impossible that this could happen. I mean, if we can't cure mental illness, how on earth, or dementia, if we don't even understand the brain well enough to do those things, I can't imagine how we would externalize it. So, however, I'm going to answer the email and see what they're looking at.
I remember seeing one tweet that was like, tech company announces they've introduced the death ray from the sci-fi novel, Don't Invent the Death Ray.
Oh, God.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions.
There's one up in front. Oh, there's some over there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's go here.
Just a general question on kind of memory, art, fiction for both of you guys, which is, it seems like a lot of what you talked about was the process of producing the book and what you have to leave off out of the book. And it seems like a lot of life these days is folks trying to create narratives, right? Assembling climaxes, beginnings, endings, taking different parts of their life, adding diegetic music to it, or having a tool or technology that does that for them without even telling them. And to what degree do you feel like that it's almost like reducing, because it seems like you're trying to capture both of you, life itself. There's something that escapes the page, if that makes sense, and you're trying to get at it. But a lot of people today seem to be trying to do what you're doing, which is to create little narratives, not as grand or as good or as striking, but a lot of the time they spend living their life seems to be, making a little fiction a little bit. And I'm just curious what you think that means about life and about fiction, your craft, all of it.
Wow.
I feel like the question was, is all life fiction?
Do you want to go first?
No, you go first, Jenny. I think this is more up your alley.
Damn. So the question is a really interesting question, which is people are making narratives all the time, and we have so many tools to do it now, right at our disposal. Music and video and all of that, and sort of what does that mean that we're doing that? And I guess what I would say is I think the wish to tell stories is as old as human beings. So that's for sure. I mean, we did that before we could write, and in a way, storytelling is. And I was back to my thing about data and the fact that we're sort of hungry for information. To my mind, storytelling is the interpretive part of that. So. We tell stories to create meaning and to make life be meaningful. I mean, I can say personally that that's one of the reasons I write fiction. It just makes life feel more alive for me personally. I do think too, though, that because we're so screen and image saturated right now, and because social media for many people, certainly younger people, creates a kind of it certainly invites all of us to create narratives out of our lives for public consumption. And I think that the wish to do that may even be more prevalent because there's sort of a theoretical audience out there for every moment. And I'm a little wary of that for various reasons, although I completely understand the wish to do it. But I'm interested in that as a cultural force. I'm not quite sure where that gets us, but I think that's partly, it's no surprise that the wish to do it is so prevalent.
Yeah, I do think that the desire to tell stories it's what makes us human. It's sitting around the campfire and but I feel personally, as a writer, that I'm not really narrative driven. I feel like my books are almost like collages, or kind of very pointillist. Again, that's just the way I process the world. I don't really see a linear thread always, and it's a lot of work sometimes to make one, come to the surface as I'm writing. But and I also sometimes I see the chapters of my novels as kind of exploded moments, and then there's a lot of space or time that can pass between one chapter and the next, and then the next chapter is again it's just one moment in time that's just kind of blow up. So I wish I could think in terms of beginning, middle, end, climax, but I think my brain just doesn't work that way.
Great. I'm sorry, I think that's all the time we have today. But if you have questions, I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone. These two will be signing books around the corner there. Please buy a copy, support the Center for Fiction. And thanks again for showing up on this horribly rainy day in this beautiful space. Let's give a round of applause for Jennifer Egan and Julia Otsuka.